Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with David Nash, and we're going to discuss his time in the press office with the Ford Motor Company in the UK and Europe. David, good to see you. Thank you very much for sparing us some time.
You're welcome.
Now, let's start off because, you didn't sort of start at Ford. You had a time in Fleet Street before getting to Ford. Can you tell us about your early days in journalism?
Well, it was very interesting because I was a coin dealer from about the age of 11, and I was writing for the American paper Coin World when I was 14, and no one knew how old I was over there. I had a stall in Petticoat Lane at the time. I was only a kid, but when other kids played football, I played with coins and learned coin catalogues. And my first job when I left school, I went to a grammar school in London, was to start as a trainee reporter on a small backstreet newspaper called Coins, Medals and Currency Weekly, just opposite the Daily Express office. And as a trainee, I was taught by incoming people who came in, worked in the evenings from strange papers like the Daily Sketch, when Fleet Street was Fleet Street, and then the Daily Herald. And I learned my trade the hard way. While my friends were at university, I was doing my apprenticeship. And after Coins, Medals and Currency, I wrote them a small book called Pocket Money, this one here, if you can see it.
Yeah, hold it a bit higher.
That was it, that Pocket Money. And eventually that sold 1/3 copies. And
wow.
that was exactly 50 years ago this week, when on the run up to decimalisation. And I was quite a Jack the Lad at the time, so I went away and I set up my own publishing company. And I wrote a series of books called All Change, which goes from the old money into decimals. And those books sold 880,000 copies in 2 years. And my little publishing company went from strength to strength. And then, because I didn't understand business law, I lost the whole lot. The people who put the money up originally bought a filling station in Surrey on the proceeds and left me with nothing. So I went back to my roots, went back to Angling Times. I started at Angling Times in East Midland Allied Press, went on to other papers like Boat News, and eventually went into industrial journalism with Tarmac, running their company newspaper, and eventually went to Goodyear Tyres. And
now this is interesting, isn't it, the Goodyear bit, because you meet a certain person.
Oh, yeah.
Gives you a bigger, introduction into larger organisations.
Well, at that time, you see, Goodyear was supplying the very, very young Formula One teams with tyres, and they used to come to us. We ran the racing division in Wolverhampton, where I was based, and as I said to you before, I can remember picking up Bernie Eccleston in my old Cortina from Wolverhampton station when he came with his hand out to my boss to ask for sets of tyres for all the fledgling Formula One teams. And then Jackie Stewart was a regular, because you can always remember the pictures of him with a Goodyear on his hat.
Yeah.
He was on the payroll in America, and I got to know Jackie quite well. And eventually, when I moved back to Essex, I did a couple of years as marketing director for Colvett Craft, the boat company. And then Ford was looking for a new press officer to look after dealers, and Jackie Stewart put my name in the frame, and I didn't look back. I did 21 years with Ford, and I had the job of all jobs that every boy racer dreams of. I had it. I've got all the T-shirts, and that's where I started with Ford. I started off writing every new car launch required all the dealers in Britain to do the same thing at the same time, in the same issue, the same press releases. And we had a wonderful team in the press office at Ford because Ford was very, very PR minded, and we had whole teams of specialist writers and people that understood engineering. And my job was to translate the heavy press releases and material into stuff that local newspapers could use in Bristol Street Motors and Evans Halshaw, and they would then put out the press releases on a set timetable, and that would coincide with their launch. And it's amazing how coordinated it was and what a good team effort we achieved.
Let's take a look now at Ford itself, because founded in 1903 in the States, Henry Ford I, he invented the production line.
Yes, well, that's true. And then he brought it to Manchester in 1909. Ford of Britain was established, and in 1911 he opened the first factory outside North America in Manchester. And ultimately, in 1931, he had the foresight to buy this huge marshland at Dagenham,
yeah,
and built the well-known factory there.
Part of the attraction of Dagenham was the fact that it was, on the Thames. It had a deep water facility as a port, which obviously Manchester didn't have, and presumably he bought the land for a song.
Oh yeah, it was amazing, because when I first joined Ford in 1980, I used to have to take the public relations department controlled the factory tours, and we used to take people around the foundry, and it had a vast foundry where they cast their own cylinder heads and engine blocks, and next door was the old Briggs body factory. And all the steel came in, the iron ore came in, the coal came in by sea, and the port there was really, really humming. But gradually things changed, and so did technology. And I was there when the foundry closed and the body plant moved, and gradually it finished up with Dagenham actually becoming solely an engine plant.
Yeah. Because the thing is, of course, that in those days when it was founded, by having the foundry and everything else in there, presumably virtually everything was actually manufactured on site and then put into the cars.
Oh yeah, that's right. Except,
whereas today it's component led, isn't it?
Basically, things like the plastics and stuff like that were brought in. But there was a very famous film about the ladies who manufactured the seats. And huge plant there where the sewing room and stuff like. I can remember all of that in my very early days, because the very first car that I was there was the very last Cortina, the Cortina Crusader. And we often took journalists around to have a look and check it out. But bit by bit, the Japanese system, what known as Kanban, was introduced, and stuff started to flow in from the docks in containers from suppliers. And gradually, bit by bit, it became a system whereby everything was on 2 or 3 days order. And by the time I left Ford, you could eat your dinner off the floors of the factories. They were so incredibly clean and tidy and organized. There was mechanization everywhere. We had these robotic trucks running around with parts, and robots actually building the engines.
It's an incredible change that you saw, during your 20 years there. Of course, in addition to the car manufacturing side, they also built commercial vehicles, didn't they? Initially under the Thames brand, I believe. It was called a Ford Thames.
Well, they were the small variants of the Ford Anglia, and the earlier versions. There was the Thames Trader, and then all these very sort of rounded-looking vehicles, and before my time, they even had those early ones had vacuum wipers, so the faster the wipers went. But that all changed, and Ford began to rationalise itself by hiving off the commercial vehicles to Slough, and eventually the trucks, the transit vans were all made in Southampton, just at the end of the runway that's so contentious for us. And the eventually the transits have moved to Turkey. The truck division was sold off to Fiat under the Iveco brand, and rationalisation has taken place. The Ford cars are made in some very, very strange places at the moment.
Yeah. Of course, they got involved with Liverpool, didn't they, in terms of the Halewood plant, which opened in 1962, specifically to continue the Anglia production. And is that still going, Halewood? Or
Halewood's, yeah, Halewood's very much alive, but under a new guise, because it was the Escort plant when I was there, and we had our own press officer there, and gradually they ran it down until the point is, I think it closed down, because it's now making, as far as I can remember, it's now part of the Jaguar Land Rover group, and there've been huge investment in the plant. When Ford, they went through a phase with the Premier Automotive Group, and it was estimated by 2004, Ford had spent £17 billion acquiring. It had Lincoln, Mercury in the States, Aston Martin, Jaguar, Mazda, Land Rover, and Volvo. And Halewood was hived off when eventually all that diversity didn't work. And Halewood then went across when Ford sold Jaguar Land Rover to the Tata Motor Group.
it's quite incredible when you sort of, presumably somebody very high up the ladder in Ford said, "Oh, let's go on a bit of a spending spree and buy some Premier marques." Well,
that was Jack Nasser.
Yeah.
Jack Nasser was a very unusual guy, and he was very opinionated. And I can remember at the Geneva Motor Show when the Escort was being replaced by the Focus. We had 2 lots of press releases on hold because he was very opinionated, and we had one name, he had another, he had Focus in mind, and it wasn't until the eve of the Geneva Motor Show that he decided it was going to be called the Ford Focus, and it's been a world beater ever since. So, you can't, the guy knew what he was doing, but he just liked the thought of owning Jaguar and Aston Martin.
Yeah.
But actually,
because
they just didn't fit.
It's worked, hasn't it, for BMW with Rolls-Royce, and it's worked with VW and Bentley.
Oh, yes.
So it's a sort of situation where I suppose Jaguar Land Rover's always been a bit iffy in terms of the finances, as is Aston Martin. So, I suppose possibly chose the wrong companies at the time.
Basically, you see, Ford's premise is sort of to cater for the mass market, with specialist models introduced as sidelines, and then you've got to make your profit first out of the big names, like the Cosworths. You see, I helped launch 2 or 3 of the different Cosworths, and you've got to have mainstream volume production to make it possible then to go into the side streams. And the Cosworth, for example, and the RS range enhance the basic vehicles. And that's where the boy racer image and the fancy stripes come from, because people feel that their Fiesta has always got the bit of an XR2 heritage.
Well, I think that's true. And of course, you know, they see success in rallies and touring cars and things like that. It's what makes people buy motor cars, I think.
Oh,
And
yeah.
of course, we saw it with the Lotus Cortina, which I suppose was one of the earliest examples.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was how we came through, and eventually ended up with uh, Cosworth, with Duckworth and those engines, because they both worked for Lotus, and they decided to build their own engines, and Ford then stepped in and helped with the financing, and the rest is history. They ended up Formula One engines. They were phenomenal machines, and that I think that's where Ford has always been a company. It works wonderfully. I was part of a fantastic team, and we were all specialists in our own way, but the team is the thing that counts. And my old governor in the press office said to me, David, he said, when I first started, we only have one standard in Ford Motor Company, and that is first class. And he said, that's all we're interested in delivering. And it's true. I drive around in a 15-year-old Ford Focus that's as good as the day it came off the production line. And I still get 3 brand new Ford cars a year on lease, and have done for the past 20 years since I retired in the UK, and I keep them over there. And I wouldn't drive anything else.
No. And of course, we mustn't forget that in competitive motorsport, they did very well in Le Mans with the GT40.
Yeah.
They actually won it in 1966, and I think had another couple of very successful attempts. So, you know, you shouldn't just think of them as an ordinary motor car manufacturer, I think.
No, well, I worked, we had the motorsport division at Boreham in Essex, and I worked a lot there with people like Malcolm Wilson. That was the beauty of being in the PR side of things, because our job was to follow them around with the cameras. And I was very lucky. I had a big studio with 6 full-time photographers working there, and we had to write the press releases and go to the rallies. And I had to go to every motor show in Europe, and I had to go to every Formula One race. And we were always very lucky to have this team effort behind us. And it showed through, and everything we did in motorsport with people like Wilson, it was, no one ever worried about weekends. We all worked consistently days a week.
Well, you got paid for a hobby, didn't you?
Oh, it was better than a hobby. You know what? I met so many fabulous people in my career that I remember Clarkson when he was a young journalist, and I ended up flying him all over Europe and the Top Gear team in private jets to test cars. And I worked with all the people you see, Tiffany Dell and the others. We were all specialists. I specialized in working with the dealers and running a dealer magazine. And then when you came to a new car launch, everybody was, and all the individuality went, and we all became team members again, and we all chipped in. And so one week I would be with the dealers from Scandinavia on the Great Wall of China. 2 weeks later, after I'd done the dealer magazine, I could be in Birmingham with the Midlands motor writers testing a new Fiesta. Dream job, and I was very, very lucky.
How did you find the celebrities?
Some of them were difficult. Because I was involved with the dealers, we always used to put on, at car launches, we put on fabulous shows. We would call them together at a huge centre like Birmingham, or one of those big multi-purpose venues. And then we'd give them a launch of the car and give them a fabulous cabaret. And I can remember sitting there, 5 of us, having a show we watched Shirley Bassey, 5 of us. She was in her long boots and big sweater, and we had our own private show in the Metropole in Birmingham. And that evening, 6 hours later, she was there in all her flash gear, and she was wonderful. She came and sat and had a beer with us. And other times there were people like, I dealt with people like Elkie Brooks and Rowan Atkinson and people like that when they were celebrities at dealer shows. And I can remember Tina Turner turning in Jamaica, one dealer convention we ran, having 200 car dealers standing on the tables in a 5-star hotel, banging their feet to Nutbush City. And afterwards, she just came out and she was as ordinary as they come. They were absolutely fabulous. So, you know, who else? That's why I like Alderney, because it's nice and peaceful.
But of course, there was a time, wasn't there, of various motor shows where it wasn't a motor show unless you got a load of young ladies in bikinis draped over the bonnet of these various motor cars that were being promoted. Presumably, that's not allowed these days.
No. Well, that finished in the
Miss World.
Well, yeah, they all. But in the end, when I always enjoyed the press day at motor shows all over Europe because it was peaceful. You could actually walk around the exhibits, meet all your friends from the other car companies, have a look at their cars, and you without all the crush and the crowd. And the journalists didn't really care. It was just the few photographers from the red top papers that wanted the
sensation. Yeah.
No, we always had a wonderful time, and after 2 or 3 days at the motor show, I couldn't wait to get away because you know the public, all they wanted to do was talk cars.
Yeah. I mean, were they primarily put on for the public or for the dealers, or a bit of both?
50-50. Basically, it was basically we had the press day, and then the dealers would all get invited, and then we'd have a big dinner and a celebrity do. But basically, every model launch was carefully planned to coincide with a certain motor show. And I used to dislike Geneva amongst all the shows. Paris was okay, but Geneva was the worst because it was the start of the year and everyone wanted to get their launch in, and it was the hardest show of all to get your car mentioned. And the beauty of Geneva for Europe was that it followed hard on the heels of Detroit.
Right.
Detroit, I never really enjoyed the Detroit Motor Show because it's always snowing, but and Detroit's not an easy place to get around without transport. But no, I didn't like to. London Motor Show used to be good when it was at Earls Court, and then they moved it to Birmingham. But no, motor shows were primarily for car launches and journalists. That was the key.
But presumably they worked, otherwise the manufacturers wouldn't have indulged themselves.
Oh, no, but they cost absolute fortune.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Very, very expensive. No, in the end, you see, the internet's changed the whole world, and motor shows are irrelevant because you can see everything online. Press packs these days, we used to produce hard copy photographs and great big books of paper. And today, the journalists all get sent a memory stick, and they are absolutely astonishing. Every photo, every video clip, every press release is there at the touch of a button. I left Ford before all that really got underway. The most high tech we ever got to do was send out a press pack on a CD.
So let's look at Dagenham, because as you said earlier, it's all it does at the moment, I think, is build diesel engines. Actually, what happens to it in 2030?
Well, I imagine that the plans are there. it's on the edge of central London, and the way things are going, I could see it becoming ultimately a huge piece of real estate.
Yeah.
The way it's going, the electric engines that they're producing, I believe that what David Earl said when he came back from Canada is correct, that we should have small grids, like the whole island should be on a grid here, and cars running around plug back into that grid at night, put the electric back in. That's the future. But I cannot see, I would want to travel to London to Manchester in an electric car, solely an electric car, in the hope that I can plug in twice and everything would work.
It could bring you back to the concept of 2 days to get there and back, couldn't it?
Oh, yeah. I can remember doing that in my dad's old Singer. It took us almost 14, 18 hours to do London to Birkenhead.
Yeah.
Up the A5.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I can't see a future for purely electric cars unless you're in a closed environment like an island like ours. You've only got to talk to our postman and they'll tell you the same. They love the cars, but whether they'd want to drive to Aberdeen in one on the hope they could recharge. Yeah. I think hybrids are probably going to be around for a lot longer than is anticipated. And people like Ford they're already making excellent hybrids, and they will continue to do so for many years.
I mean, I think 2030 is quite an over-optimistic date to go for. 8 years away to expect the total revolution, I think, is asking far too much, particularly bearing in mind that they haven't got the charging facilities. And as you say, the batteries haven't got the capacity to go any reasonable distance as such.
No, it's totally unrealistic, I think, 8 or 9 years to do away with petrol and diesel. But then the people that make those decisions probably have never worked in the motor industry or never driven themselves around.
No. Unless they were special advisors going to Baynard's Castle.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, just want to come back to your duties with Ford, because I believe you've got a story to tell us that involves a certain headquarters of a church in Rome.
Oh yeah, well, again, if you look at any of the people, you've only got to look at the Chancellor going into the BBC and to Sky yesterday, and standing behind him was a young lady with a clipboard with all the papers and everything else. And when you're in public relations in a major global corporation, you literally become a bag carrier for the very top people. And as I said, I can remember I worked for Edsel Ford, the great-great-grandson of Henry, personally for several years. And one day I got a request to say, oh, Mrs. Ford would like to meet the Pope. So I remember getting on to Ford of Italy, and the Ford of Italy people knew the right people to talk to in the Vatican. And before you know it, we were on a private jet with our leather seats from Stansted. We had our own airline at that stage, Ford Air.
All right, okay.
Yeah, we were there in Rome, and we put up in the best hotel, and the guy from Ford Italy arranged for one of the Scorpios to turn up. And they duly ended up, they went to the Vatican, they met the Pope. But that's the beauty of working for, people don't understand, a global multinational has a huge reach. And we often did very, very unusual things. I made sure that when Mrs. Ford walked around Italy during that particular visit, she had an armed escort. And she had a bodyguard with her at all times, because there were major kidnappings of people that were held to ransom. And it seems a bit odd these days, but that's the kind of level that I was lucky enough to operate at. Yeah.
Did you do anything else whilst you were there? In terms of other duties, or other tales to tell us about?
Oh, well, as I say, I can remember going to to the Great Wall of China, Ford was very good at sales incentives trips for the dealers. And because in my first 15 years I was working with the dealers, somebody said, oh, we want to send all the top 100 Scandinavian dealers to China. So I picked up the phone and we arranged with the Chinese government to go to Beijing. And I can remember myself and the boss of Ford Sweden being met off the plane with this long stretch black windowed Mercedes, and we had outriders, and we went through a whole. They were so keen to get Ford to do production in China.
Yeah,
they put the real red carpet out, and we went here, there. We went round we got a privileged view around the Winter Palace and Tiananmen Square, and we were told to go to a showpiece hospital that was the worst place on this earth that no way would I ever even want to walk in the door. And then we took them up to the Great Wall, and when we asked them where are the toilets, they said, oh well, they pointed to so I had to arrange for porter cabin toilets, portaloos, to be put at the foot of the Great Wall of China for all these Swedish dealers and their ladies, because there's no way they would going just as over a squat in a pit. But that was just one of the stories.
Did you leave the loos behind?
Oh, we left the loos behind, but when we went back 6 weeks later and we set it all up. I had a VIP tour of the Chinese opera, and we had the finest Chinese restaurants for them because they were so keen to have Ford there. And Ford did set up a manufacturing facility.
Yeah,
but that was just one of the many things. 6 weeks later we took them back. They had a wonderful time, and 4 weeks later I was taking another 200 dealers around Disney World in Florida. So you name it, I've got the t-shirts.
And I think at that point we'll say thank you very, very much. It's been most interesting, really good to talk to you, and we'll be talking again, I'm sure, at some future date about other things. Thanks, David.
Yes, too. You're welcome.